What happens when two cops harass an elderly black woman, only to realize her son is the U.S. Attorney General? The grocery bags in the passenger seat rustled softly as Evelyn Matthews pulled onto Brentwood Drive, a quiet street lined with well-kept lawns and large two-story homes. She'd lived in Lexington, Kentucky for over 20 years, and this was just another Thursday afternoon until it wasn't. She first saw them in her rearview mirror, a black and white police cruiser trailing her car, its presence just noticeable enough to stir something deep inside her. At first she dismissed it. Maybe they were just patrolling. Maybe they weren't even looking at her. But then the flash of red and blue lit up behind her. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run a stop sign. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Still she signaled, pulled over to the curb, and put the car in park. Her heart wasn't racing, but there was a familiar tension in her chest. One she'd known all too well growing up in a world where people like her had to be twice as careful. She exhaled and reached for her purse, where her license and registration were tucked inside. But before she could grab them, a sharp knock at her window made her pause. She turned her head slowly, eyes meeting the reflective sunglasses of the officer standing outside her door. Another officer stood behind her car, hand resting near his holster, license and registration. The first officer said, his voice clipped, impatient. No greeting, no explanation. Just those 3 words. Evelyn kept her movements slow and deliberate. She knew the rules, hands visible, no sudden gestures, nothing that could be misinterpreted. She rolled down the window. Good. Afternoon, officers, she said evenly. May I ask why I'm being pulled over? The officer shifted his weight. Your vehicle matches the description of a stolen car. We need to see your ID. Evelyn's eyebrows lifted slightly. A stolen car, a silver sedan, the same one she'd been driving for nearly a decade. Still, she didn't argue. She reached into her purse, retrieved her license and registration, and handed them over. The officer snatched them, barely glancing before walking back toward his cruiser. The second officer lingered. He peered into the back seat, scanning the bags of groceries, the neatly folded reusable shopping totes. He didn't say a word, but Evelyn could feel the weight of his gaze. She knew what he was thinking. She knew what kind of assumptions were running through his mind. But she stayed calm because this wasn't new. But something about today felt different. Evelyn sat still, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the officer in the side mirror as he walked back to his cruiser with her ID. The second officer still hadn't moved. He was standing just outside her backseat window, now eyes scanning every inch of her car as if expecting something to magically appear. His fingers drummed lightly against his belt. He wasn't talking, just watching. Evelyn refused to let her posture falter. Is there a problem, officer? She asked, her voice smooth but firm. The man didn't answer right away. He took his time, his eyes flicking to her hands, then back to her face, before finally speaking. Where are you coming from? She tilted her head slightly. The question wasn't necessary, not for a routine traffic stop, not if they already had her license and registration, but she answered anyway. Grocery store, just picking up a few things before heading home. He nodded, but there was something about the way he did it, like he didn't believe her. You live around here? Evelyn's fingers tapped lightly against the steering wheel. I do. Whereat she let out a slow breath. Officer, is this relevant to why I was pulled over? That seemed to bother him. His stance shifted. His shoulders squared up just a little more. We're just making sure everything checks out, he said. Evelyn had heard those words before. She knew what they really meant, before she could respond. The first officer returned her ID, still in his hand, but this time his expression was different, a little harder, a little more suspicious. This car isn't coming back as stolen, he admitted. But, and there it was, we still need to verify a few things. Evelyn arched a brow. Verify what exactly? Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. The second officer moved closer, his hand now hovering just a little too close to his holster. Evelyn felt her pulse slow, not speed up, slow, because she knew exactly what was happening. Now she'd seen the stories, she'd heard them, and now she was living one. But she wasn't about to let them dictate how this would go. Evelyn didn't move right away. She sat still, her grip tightening ever so slightly around the steering wheel. Is there a reason I need to step out of my vehicle? She asked. Her voice even controlled. The first officer didn't like that his jaw clenched. "Ma'am, we're asking you to step out. We don't need to explain ourselves." But that wasn't true, and Evan knew it. She had spent over 4 decades teaching children how to think critically, how to ask questions, how to stand their ground, when they knew they were right. She had taught these men's children, and now they wanted her to ignore everything she had spent a lifetime instilling in others. She exhaled slowly, then reached for the door handle. As soon as she unlatched it, the second officer took a step back, hands still hovering near his holster, like he expected her to do something. She swung the door open, moving deliberately slow, and planted both feet on the pavement. The air was thick, tense. The first officer folded his arms. "You have any weapons on you?" Evelyn blinked. She was wearing a loose, short-sleeved cardigan over a simple blouse and slacks. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was armed, and yet they were treating her like a threat. "I don't," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of something heavier. Now something borderline insulted. The first officer gave a short nod, then tilted his chin toward the trunk. "Mind if we take a look inside there?" It was Evelyn, locked eyes with him. "Do you have probable cause?" The second officer shifted comfortably. The first one held his ground. "We're just making sure everything checks out." That phrase again. Evelyn inhaled sharply through her nose. Then she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't polite. It was the kind of smile that said, "I see exactly what you're doing, and I'm not playing along." Then, without breaking eye contact, she reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out her phone. Slow, intentional. Her thumb moved over the screen, scrolling through her recent calls, and then she tapped her name. She lifted the phone to her ear, waited a few seconds, then spoke. "Hey, baby, I'm fine, but these officers here seem to think I'm a car thief." The shift was instant. The first officer's face twitched, a flicker of hesitation, confusion, concern. The second officer was glancing between them, now suddenly uncertain, and then Evelyn dropped the bomb. "Oh, I'll hand them the phone. The U.S. Attorney General would like to speak with them." The first officer blinked. The second officer took a half step back for the first time since this encounter began. They looked unsure, and Evelyn knew in that moment she had them for a moment. The only sound was the faint buzz of distant traffic and the wind rustling through the trees. Neither officer moved. Evelyn extended the phone toward them, her grip steady. "Go ahead," she said, her voice light but full of meaning. The first officer hesitated. His jaw tightened, but his fingers didn't move. The second officer exchanged a glance with him, shifting from foot to foot, like he was suddenly unsure of his place in all of this. "You don't want to take the call?" Evelyn asked, eyebrows raising slightly. Silence. Then a tiny commanding voice echoed through the speaker. "Mom, what's going on? Put me on speaker." And just like that, the balance of power tilted. Evelyn turned the phone so that both officers could hear. "You're on," she said, her voice still calm. The voice on the other end, not so calm. "This is U.S. Attorney General Richard Matthews. Speaking. To whom am I speaking?" The second officer took another step back. The first officer's face lost its edge. His stance shifted just slightly enough for Evan to notice the change in demeanor. "Sir, this is Officer Dawson with the Lexington PDIC, and tell me, Officer Dawson, why are you detaining my mother?" Dawson opened his mouth, then shut it. The second officer, silent up until now, suddenly found something interesting to look at on the ground. Evelyn watched as realization sank into their expressions. They weren't dealing with just anyone. They had stopped a black elderly woman for no valid reason, and now they had to answer for it. "Sir, Dawson cleared his throat. "We were conducting a routine stop." "A routine stop?" Richard's voice was sharp. "You forced a 72-year-old woman out of her car. You asked to search her vehicle without probable cause. That's not routine." Now either officer had an answer for that, and Evelyn, she just waited because she already knew how this would play out. They would backtrack. They always did. Officer D.W. cleared his throat again, his confidence draining with every second of silence. "We may have overstepped," he said. Finally, though the words sounded forced, Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She had taught middle school boys with more convict than this man. The second officer, still avoiding eye contact, shifted his stance. "Ma'am, we were just doing our jobs." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. No, she said simply, you weren't. Dorson inhaled sharply through his nose, but before he could try to defend himself, Richard's voice cut through again. I want your badge numbers, both of you. Evelyn watched as Dorson visibly hesitated. He didn't want to do it. He thought he could smooth this over, brush it off. But now the game had changed slowly. He pulled out his notepad, scribbled something down, and handed the piece of paper to Evelyn. The second officer followed suit, though his hands shook slightly. Evelyn took the paper and folded it, neatly slipping it into her pocket. Without looking, Richard spoke. Again, you'll be hearing from Internal Affairs, and trust me, this will not be forgotten silence. For the first time since this whole thing started, neither officer had anything left to say. Evelyn inhaled deeply, then turned back to her car. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She moved with the same grace and poise she always had, because they had tried to strip that from her, and they failed. She slid into her seat, shut the door, and rolled up the window. Dorson stepped back, as if he had just realized she wasn't some fragile old woman. She was power. The second officer, still avoiding her gaze, shifted awkwardly as they both started back toward their cruiser. Evelyn placed both hands on the steering wheel again, steady, composed. She pulled away from the curb, her back straight, her chin high, but she knew this wasn't over, because the real issue wasn't who her son was. The real issue was that she had to make that call in the first place. The ride home was silent, but Evelyn's mind was anything but. She should have been thinking about dinner, about the book she'd been reading, about whether she remembered to buy the right kind of tea. Instead, she replayed the last 30 minutes in her head. How quickly things escalated, how familiar it all felt, how different it could have gone if she were someone else. Her son's name had saved her. But what about the ones who didn't have that safety net? What about the ones who never made it home? She turned onto her street, slowing as she pulled into her driveway. The house she had lived in for 20 years, the one she had worked hard for, looked the same as it always did, and yet it didn't feel the same anymore. She parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment. She let herself feel it. The frustration, the exhaustion, the disgust at the fact that even at 72 she still had to prove she belonged. Then she exhaled and opened the door, because she wasn't going to let two men with badges steal anything more from her than they already had. As she stepped inside, her phone buzzed a text from Richard. You okay? Evelyn stared at the screen for a second before typing back. I will be. She set the phone down on the counter, shook off the weight of the day, and reached for the kettle. Because if she had learned anything in her 72 years, it was this. The world wasn't fair. Justice wasn't guaranteed, and dignity was something you had to fight to keep. But she wasn't going to stop fighting. Not today. Not ever. This happens too often to people who don't have the right connections, the right titles, the right names. Evelyn had a way out, but what if she didn't? How many stories have ended differently? How many voices have been silenced? It's not just about one bad stop. It's about a system that allows it to keep happening. We can't look away. We can't stay silent, because next time it could be someone you love,